Good morning and welcome to More Tea Minister. My name is Ian. Today we are looking at a tea from Japan. The vendor is Yunomi.life. The tea is Ishimoto's Kancha. The reason why I wanted to review this tea is because it represents something of a paradox. It's a tea that on the one hand is a commonplace to this day in Japan, and yet this variation of tea is, without any exaggeration, unique. Kancha in Japanese means cold tea. It's tea that's harvested in the winter months after the turning of the year. It's harvested from wild tea plants and on a very small scale. It's the ultimate expression of farmer's tea, something produced by a farmer or a community for their own use. It also represents that principle of avoiding waste. How do you maximize your resources and use them to the full? So it's a way to preserve tea. Kancha is an example of a tea a bit like Kyobancha. If you remember the first video on this channel, Kyobancha is a way to use the bancha tea leaves from the bancha season when the leaves are older, thicker, coarser, more bitter, less suitable for producing green tea. And Kancha is even more the case because the leaves are even bigger and tougher and coarser and more bitter than the bancha leaves. So it's very unlikely that they could ever be used for straightforward green tea production. It's also the case that because these leaves are being harvested essentially for local use and local consumption, then the commercial scale isn't really something of an issue in the first place. So it's produced at small scale from wild tea plants by hand and processed by hand. So you get that sense of how localized and what a small scale this is produced at. Kancha is also commonplace because its means of production overlaps with other kinds of similar teas. There's a tea called Sanin Bancha, 3-year Bancha, which also uses extremely coarse tea material or ages it for 3 years, depending on how you understand the means of production. But once again, Kancha isn't distinctive because of how it's produced or why it's produced. However, we start to understand what makes it unique and so special when we think about the idea of localism. Localism is something that has held on tenaciously in the face of globalized, modernized society, where various forces, both social and commercial, tend to flatten the distinctions between people or between families and communities and whole societies to try and standardize not just ideas and culture, but sometimes I feel people as well. Localism works against that. I saw a map of just one region of Japan, which highlighted within various sub-regions the different kinds of tea or tea recipes and styles that were native to those sub-regions. And localism fights tenaciously to keep those different ideas alive, whereas the forces of globalism and modernity would do away with those. Now, I'm not saying this as some kind of Luddite who's against modernity as a whole, otherwise I wouldn't be speaking to you on YouTube and I wouldn't be recording this on a mobile phone. But I also believe that what is local and what's native and what's part of a place that represents a place and a people, I think that's important and worth preserving as well. And Kancha really has something of that about it. So what's really making Kancha unique is that it's now only produced by 3 producers, and one of whom I think we can leave to one side because their means of production means it kind of overlaps with a green tea but also other bancha teas. And so we're left with 2 producers, one of whom ironically picked up the, let's call it the recipe from for Kancha from a different region, but out of an interest to preserve that recipe and that way of doing things, brought it back to his tea farm. And that leaves us with this particular Kancha. And this is truly unique because it's made not just in one region or in one village or even one farm, but by one person, who is Akemi Ishimoto, and she is 87. So you have that sense of it's not just resting on one area, that local, but one person, what that one person can know and what that one person can transmit on to future generations. But if the reason why this particular Kancha and its recipe rests on the shoulders of one person goes back to those forces of modernity. Her village Ruo experienced the kind of drift to the towns and cities that has plagued not just Japanese rural life, but over here in the UK and lots of other countries as well. In her case, it effectively depopulated the village of any young people. And out of the 10 inhabitants of her village, her remote mountain village, all 10 of them are in their 70s and 80s, if I understand the reports correctly. Now, Akemi-san is a very far-sighted person and could see this problem coming even 50 years ago. And so getting together with other local farmers, came up with the Kancha Production Association and came up with a standardized recipe. Not so standardized that it lost local interest and local characteristics, but nonetheless was something that they could all use, a process they could all follow and could, to that extent, could be standardized. And for a while, their Kancha was a local speciality. It was commercially viable. However, with the forces of modernity and the simple, remorseless passage of time against them, Akemi is the now sole remaining producer of her version of Kancha, and even that is only one of 2 or 3 Kancha producers at all. So what can we say about this tea? Well, first of all, I'm going to show you the tea leaves. You can probably see that they are uniform green colour. It is effectively much more like a green tea than the Kirkcudbright we looked at. There's no roasting process to change the colour or change the texture of the leaves. To give you some sense of just how big the leaves are, this is standard packaging from Yunomi.life, but this is a 50-gram pack. Now, normally 50 grams of tea you could store in something a third of the size. But because the leaves are so big, not because they're Kancha leaves, and also because they're not rolled, as we saw with Kirkcudbright, as is the case with oolong, you end up with these much bigger leaves, uniformly green. If the tea is oversteeped, and some people will do this deliberately, if the tea is oversteeped, you will start to get the very bitter characteristic that this means of processing, at the very least, tones down. I've had this tea before, not much of it because I want to preserve the supplies I have, and it does come across as a sort of toned down green tea. So what do we have in front of us for our tea today? We have a bowl of tea. We have 6 grams, do beg your pardon. Our kettle is set to 90 degrees, 400 mils of water, already measured out. We have our small scale teapot. We have our trusty transparent jug so you can see what we're brewing or how it's brewed. We have our strainer. I don't really need the broad brimmed strainer for this because I'm not going to pour in a hurry, but nonetheless it fits well there. And also a new cup. I got a pair of these on holiday recently, and I said to the vendor and ceramicist, the person who makes these and sells them, that I would give his shop a shout out on the next video I did. So I'll put all the details for that, along with the details for the tea, in the description box below. So let's get on with making our tea. It's for 60 to 90 seconds, and we are going to give it the full 90 seconds just to see, well, how full of flavour is anticipated or intended for this tea. I'm being very careful about getting in the pot. I don't want to waste any of it. That's why I've already pre-measured the water in the jug, and I've even set my tablet to give me 90 seconds. And let's make a start. So that's our timer on. I'll very briefly explain how this tea is produced. Akemi-san harvests it by hand. She can manage 4 kilograms of tea a day, which doesn't sound a lot, but she's harvesting it by a hand or with a sickle on a sloping hillside. And she's 87, so give her a break. The leaves are then taken in and sorted. Because it's harvested without a great deal of finesse, there's lots of branches and immature leaves, so those are removed. The leaves are then steamed for half an hour. That's a long steaming process. Normally it would destroy a tea leaf, but in this case, as you've seen, they're still fairly intact. The leaves are then massaged by machine, and then Akemi-san finishes the massaging by hand. The leaves are then left in a bucket for 24 hours, and the leaves are dried for 5 to 6 days in her greenhouse. And that leaves us with this finished product. It's rather nice, but there's a local nickname for her, which is the Kancha Granny, because she's so much associated in the local area and beyond with producing Kancha. In fact, she became, I think, for a little while, something of a micro-celebrity, and rightly so, for someone intent on preserving an important local custom. So let's turn that noise off. Let's get a smell of the tea. The kind of vegetal quality of a green tea, but milder. Let's get this poured out. Very little should come out of the spout of the kettle, because the leaves, as you know, as I've said, are so big. Let's have a look at the colour of this tea. It's a pale greeny gold. And the smell, it's kind of woody. It doesn't come across as a purely green tea. It doesn't have that purely kind of vegetable, savoury quality that green tea has. Let's see if it smells any different on the cup. Slightly sweeter. I find that's often the case when the tea gets poured into a cup, it becomes sweeter. It is like a more soothing and smoother green tea. It's very, very refreshing. I can understand why Akemi-san finds this tea so appealing. There's no bitterness, at least not at 90 seconds. It's just getting everything that you can want out of a tea leaf without, and you leave behind all of the bitterness, all of the things that make it less approachable, less enjoyable. Yeah, it's a really rounded flavour. It's perhaps surprising when it's so simply produced and from such unpromising material, but it's a really rounded flavour. So this video is already long enough, but I did want to talk about the background to this tea. Remember, when I come to recommend a tea, it's on 3 fronts. Is it easy to brew? Is it easily available? And is it simply enjoyable? Yes, the tea is enjoyable. If you're a green tea fan, I think you'll enjoy this. If you want to try something akin to a green tea, but that doesn't have the roasted edge of a Kyo-bancha, you could do worse with this. Is it easy to brew? Well, you've seen teapot, very simple production, 90 seconds, no complications there. Is it readily available? Well, there are 2 vendors that I know of, one from Japan and one, oddly enough, in Canada, and their sale of Akemi-san's tea is rather touching because it's accompanied with the opportunity to correspond with Akemi and to offer one's appreciation for her work and her efforts at maintaining a heritage. I am going to give this tea a pass. I don't care how available it is. I don't usually talk about price, but this doesn't have a sort of price tag you would associate with something that is, by its very nature, so exclusive. So, and what that sense, the cachet and the exclusivity don't work against it. But even if this tea was hugely expensive, I'd still be recommending it because of what it is, because of what it represents, and because of Akemi-san's efforts to do something I believe is noble and very humane, to preserve a tradition and a heritage, not in the face of or against modernity, but just to make sure that what can be preserved and what is worth preserving is preserved. So, here endeth the lesson. I hope you've enjoyed this video, that it's been of some use to you. All that remains for me to do is to say happy steeping and God bless.